Good afternoon, everyone. How's it going? Got a little bit of Seahawks news here. Not really of the good kind, although some people may take this as good news. I don't know. And by the way, sorry I wasn't able to get a video about this up earlier. This is something that was announced this morning, but I was unable to make a video about it at that time, but we're doing it now. So if you haven't heard, it looks like the Minnesota Vikings are indeed going to be involved tangentially in the Seahawks defensive coaching staff hunt. So last night, or well, this morning actually, I posted a video talking about how the Minnesota Vikings may be looking to hire Sean Desai as their defensive coordinator, and that would obviously preclude us hiring him as a defensive passing game coordinator. Well, obviously, you have the Carl Scott news where he's coming in as the defensive passing game coordinator. And now you have this, where apparently the Vikings are looking to get a coach that the Seahawks are trying to get, but it's not Sean Desai. So reportedly, the Vikings are closing in on hiring Ed Donatel as their defensive coordinator. So the Minnesota Vikings are going to find a way to weaken the Seahawks stables on their defensive coaching staff, just not in the way we predicted. And obviously, we had gotten news several days ago that we were hiring Ed Donatel, but would be a significant step up for Donatel, being a defensive coordinator versus being either a passing game coordinator or a defensive senior assistant. This would be pretty much a no-brainer for him to take the defensive coordinator position. So that part of it makes sense. Now, this is definitely a scenario where you might be looking at it as one door closes but another door opens. Sean Desai was supposed to be the leader of the pack to become the Vikings defensive coordinator. So if Donatel gets this position, then Desai is without a team again. And at that point, he may come to Seattle. And further on that note, Corbin Smith speculated, as has been speculated by others before, but Corbin Smith tweeted this out earlier today. Co-coordinators may be on the table with Hurt and Desai. Titles are only arbitrary at this time. So you may be looking at a situation where Carl Scott is the defensive... Clint Hurt is the defensive coordinator with a lean towards run defense, and Desai is the defensive coordinator with a lean towards pass defense. So definitely an interesting wrinkle, definitely an unexpected curveball here. I don't take it to be good news necessarily, but it could easily end up being good news, and some people will take it that way. So, as of right now, it seems to me that the Seahawks are going to end up with whichever coach the Vikings don't pick. If the Vikings decide to get Desai as their DC, we're keeping Donatel. If the Vikings take Donatel, then I think Desai is going to be kind of our backup plan. So we were thinking that it looked like we were going to get both, and that is still possible. The Vikings could end up going a third route here. There were a couple other guys they were considering for DC, but at this point I think it's very likely that at least one of those guys ends up the defensive coordinator in Minnesota. So it looks like we're going to have to settle for one or the other. And I think that some people might say that we were going to have too many cooks in the kitchen. This is better. We don't want to have that many defensive minds on the same staff, guys who are going to be vying and jockeying for power. But I was actually kind of interested to see how they were going to try to make it work with so many guys on the staff. So it's a little disappointing. But the more important question is, who would you rather have, Desai or Donatel? And I think most people are going to say Sean Desai. They would rather have Sean Desai on the coaching staff simply because he's younger, he has more upside. He may be a head coaching candidate in a few years here. You can't say that about Donatel. I'm not so sure myself. I think all those things about Desai are true. I also think Desai might be a good candidate to get a lot out of Jamal Adams because of he was a safeties coach in Chicago for a little bit. But Donatel also brought in credentials that would carry a lot of weight. So I'm not so sure if I would choose Desai over Donatel, but it looks like that's the decision that is going to end up being made here. Now, it's not our decision to make. It's the Vikings' decision. Because being a defensive coordinator is more desirable than just being a lower man on the staff. So I have to believe both guys would take that DC position and not feel too bad about whatever they're going to miss out over here in Seattle. So if we can find a way to keep both, then obviously that's great. Plus Carl Scott and, of course, Clint Hurt. Now, if we get one of them, then so be it. I can go either way. I think there are pros and cons to Desai and Donatell. And if you guys want to post who you would prefer, if given a choice between Desai and Donatell, go ahead and post it down below. They're both Fangio guys. They both bring some very interesting stuff to the table. However, just real quick here, if the Vikings get Donatell and then Desai goes somewhere else, like I think there's still an opening for, I think there's still like an opening for the DC spot in Baltimore. I'm not sure if they've got somebody yet, but I think there's one or two spots open. What then? At that point, we would be left with Clint Hurt as the DC, with no really great defensive minds to back him up unless you count Pete Carroll, which it depends on who you ask, right? And then you have Carl Scott, who is appealing. He did some great stuff at Alabama. He did some good work with the safeties in Minnesota, but doesn't really carry the gravitas of Donatell or Desai. And you're just kind of left, I think anyway, for me personally, I think I would be left pretty disappointed with that. That would strike me as just a fairly lateral move, maybe a slight improvement on Norton, but you're not doing anything too special there, because I know some people are saying that, hey, Clint Hurt is not here to be a yes man. Well, he's been under Pete for the last 5 years, so I don't know if you can say that Hurt's going to bring anything that new in. And if it ends up breaking in that way, where we don't get Donatell, we don't get Desai, and end up just with Clint Hurt and Carl Scott, and understanding that Clint Hurt was an in-house promotion, Carl Scott did not really have a very good year his first year in the NFL, it will probably bring back some of the conversations that we have sometimes about whether or not people want to come to Seattle. Now, I get it. If Donatell takes the DC job in Minnesota, that is a significant position increase for him compared to what he was going to get in Seattle. That makes sense, independent of what you can say about the Seahawks as an organization right now. And if Desai gets a DC job, I kind of get that too, because that's obviously more appealing than being a co-coordinator. But if we lose both those guys after having both of them in our crosshairs, after clearly making a pretty powerful play to get them and being unable to, it cannot help but revive that old discussion point of, do people want to play for the Seahawks? Do people want to coach for the Seahawks? I've talked before about how it's been almost a decade since the Seahawks have signed a big-time free agent. All of our big-time acquisitions are via trade. We keep our own guys. We keep our own guys in-house, but we don't sign big-name free agents. They always end up going somewhere else. And we all have theories as to why that might be. I think a lot of people think it's a Carroll thing for some reason. Players don't really want to play for Carroll. And if this ends up happening where Desai and Donatell leave, then it could at least kind of revive that conversation around the idea that maybe people don't want to coach under Pete Carroll. And if it happens, we'll talk more about it later, but I'll say this. Whoever it is or whatever it is that is making players supposedly not want to play here, it's not worth it. And what I mean by that is, if players don't want to play for Carroll, which is why we can't get big-time free agents, which is why we always settle for the Brandon Shells and Greg Olsons of the world in free agency, and if promising coaches don't want to coach under Pete Carroll, which is why we constantly end up with guys who otherwise wouldn't have a strong position or otherwise wouldn't have a team, like for instance, a guy like Clint Hurt. He was not, I don't believe anyway, on any team's radar to be poached and made DC. And Carl Scott, who spent 1 year as a defensive back coach and honestly didn't do that well, if something in the water here in Seattle is making it so that coaches don't want to coach here, and players don't want to play here. And by the way, this goes back to even the Shane Waldron hiring, and I don't dislike Waldron, but he had never called plays before. If he did not get an offensive coordinator job in Seattle, it's very unlikely he would have gotten one anywhere last offseason. So, if it is the case, whatever it is that is keeping players and coaches from wanting to come here, the promising, high-end, really interesting guys, I promise you it is not worth it. I don't care if you think Pete Carroll is still a good coach, and I know some of you do. If he is like some sort of gatekeeper that is keeping these really high-end players away and keeping some of these appealing coaches away, it is not worth it. And I hope that if that is the case, because there's no way for us to know, this could just be a thing where we're getting unlucky. It could just be a situation where we're getting a little unlucky here, and maybe we've been unlucky in the past as well. But if it's Pete, it's Pete. He's got to go. I don't care what it is. If it's Schneider, it's Schneider. If it's Wilson, it's Wilson. If it's the stadium, then build a new stadium. I don't care what it is. But if there is something that is keeping appealing players and appealing coaches from coming to Seattle, get it out. But we'll talk more about that if it actually happens. So, latest that I've heard is that Donatell is likely to become the Vikings DC, which does clear the way for us to get Sean Desai, and you may see a co-coordinator thing between Hurt and Desai. So let me know what you guys think down below. I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. Peace out. Go Hawks. A little bit of a plot twist. Some of you guys are going to be cool with this. I'm a little disappointed if it breaks this way, but like I said, if one door closes and one door opens, then there's some benefit there too. All right, see you guys later.